Host and thrilled to be joining you here after the first presidential debate of the 2016 presidential campaign. Quite a night there as Hillary Clinton sparred with Donald Trump on stage next door to us here on the campus of Hofstra University, Hempstead, New York. You might call this debate, Abby, the dirty laundry debate, maybe the kitchen sink debate. They covered a lot of ground, most of it, I think, frankly, over the sort of more notable aspects of their backgrounds that have become controversial throughout this whole campaign.
And I think in a lot of ways, this debate really covered everything that we thought would probably come up. And also, in a lot of ways, we saw a lot of different kinds of Donald Trumps on that stage tonight, as we all expected. At the beginning, he was quite subdued, I would say. And then he quickly kind of ramped up, and suddenly it was the Trump that we're a lot more familiar with, someone who interrupted her pretty constantly throughout the debate. He had a lot of side comments. He interrupted Lester Holt, the moderator, throughout the debate. So it was pretty lively, and I think we have a lot of ground to cover tonight.
As this is Facebook Live, we'll take your questions throughout the conversations that we're going to have over the next few minutes. Make your comments as well. Keep them clean, please. As we continue this conversation. We'll be joined in a little bit by representatives of the Clinton and the Trump campaigns to give us their sense of how they think tonight went. We're in Spin Alley, or the Media Filing Center, choose your name for it. The world's media has gathered here, more than 3,000 reporters from around the world, or representing news organizations from around the world. We at the Washington Post, of course, are here, our colleagues with other newspapers and TV outlets. You'll see a bit of activity play out here behind us because we are anticipating that representatives of both campaigns will be here to talk to reporters. Who knows, maybe the candidates themselves may stop by as well to try to talk to some of these outlets. I think as we look back on these 90 minutes or so, in some respects it was almost exactly what we anticipated.
Yeah.
Combative, personal, didn't necessarily have a lot of memorable back and forth about substance or about policy, perhaps outside of the economy and trade, which was the first real topic, but definitely ended up devolving into conversations about temperament and judgment, emails and tax returns.
And I think we'll also be talking about the moderator as well, too, because it was sort of a debate that he was sort of railroaded throughout the whole thing in some ways by both candidates. And it'll be interesting to see how Trump and Clinton respond to what he did and what he didn't do tonight, and how that affects how people come out of this debate interpreting what happened. I mean, Donald Trump spent a lot of time talking about things not being correct tonight.
Right.
And I think that if you were a viewer looking at this at home, it would be very hard to know what was true and what was not.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. I think, though, overall it seemed that she had a better grasp of the format, of the venue, and the audience. You heard her a few times refer to people watching at home or listening at home. Trump, it seemed, got bogged down, as he often does, in defending his own business record, his own personality, his own life's story.
And he responded to her so much, especially at the beginning. I mean, it was very notable that Clinton at the beginning had a couple of lines that I think were very tailored toward Trump. She said, she called his sort of economic plan trumped up trickle-down economics. That's a completely new line. She debuted it here tonight, and it was intended to go after Trump, and he responded to it. And then moments later, she mentioned, kind of in passing, that he had received a large loan from his father. And Trump responded to that.
He didn't refute it.
And he didn't like it either.
No.
And he said that the loan was actually a very small loan. I mean, this is a more than $1 million loan in today's money, but he called it a very small loan. And he seemed to get very worked up about it and a little bit annoyed that she had brought it up. So right out of the gate, it seemed very much like the Clinton strategy was to sort of get Trump back in the place that we are more familiar with seeing him, which is as someone who is responsive and reactive and is willing to kind of go back at her.
And if you go back to those first few minutes of the debate, you heard him at least twice refer to the states of Michigan and Ohio and the economic problems that they're having. That was on purpose. I mean, those are two places, two Rust Belt states he'd really like to win. He's doing quite well in Ohio. He's inching up on Clinton in Michigan. He mentioned Pennsylvania as well, which is a critical battleground, especially for Clinton, and one that Republicans every 4 years dream about in their wildest dreams of winning. there's some polling that suggests he's pulling a little closer.
Yeah.
He also mentioned economic distress in New England. That's a tip to New Hampshire, to Maine. There's a possibility that he could prevail in New Hampshire, maybe win one of the congressional district electoral votes in Maine. So clearly tonight, trying to make appeals to distressed families, if you will, suffering in those areas, who may not like what they're hearing from Hillary Clinton.
So the big question tonight is, did Donald Trump do what he needed to do, which is make the case that he could do this job? I mean, what do you think, Ed?
I mean, I have a feeling that the Clinton campaign will try to make hay of the fact that he did interrupt her at several times, that he did sort of raise his voice and almost start shouting at her from across the stage, that he clearly was not pleased with Lester Holt's control of the debate and interrupted him a lot, and they'll continue to amplify that temperament argument. He can push back and say, well, we got her on the ropes regarding the economy, which remains, the central issue of this campaign. She pulled, as I saw some Republicans saying, they're going to say that she pulled a John Kerry tonight, admitting that she was for the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal before she was against it, which was, of course, the 2004
that key
line.
moment early on in the debate.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I think both of them will have things they can walk away from being very pleased about. But I do think, through his own words and actions tonight, a lot of the concerns that she raises about his temperament and ability to do the job were displayed right there on stage.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, that would be the case if this were a normal election, that Trump was Trump.
Right.
Maybe some people will see that as temperamentally unfit, maybe people won't. But he kind of was the same person that people are used to seeing. And thus far, that's gotten him at 40-something% in the polls. And so we'll see whether that changes after this election. What I was also interested in was the way that Trump was talking about Clinton. He was telling the audience exactly what he wanted them to think of Hillary Clinton.
Right.
He said, she's a typical politician. And he kept repeating that over and over again. And that's exactly what he wants them to come away with. And so it's easy for people to understand what he wanted them to come away with. I think it's a little bit hard, more nuanced, what she was trying to sort of hammer home about Donald Trump.
And the idea that he raises the idea that she's a typical politician, of course, comes as he tries to cast himself as the change agent. Although it was notable that a few times he said, you've been at this for 30 years. At one point he said, you've been fighting ISIS your entire adult life.
I think that was pretty clearly
her
her
facial expression said it all.
Right.
And there were other moments as well. But clearly, the attempts to get under his skin a little bit seemed to work. And that conversation there towards the end about temperament and about whether or not she was physically fit and able to do this job, and her response about stamina, I think that again an appeal to women, bringing up the former Miss Universe contestant who Machado is her last name, who Trump had criticized for her appearance years ago, not only a play to women but also to Hispanic voters who may have been watching as well. She kind of got in everything that she was trying to do to raise concerns about
virtually everything that the campaign has been talking about for many months. She got all of those things in tonight. I think from that perspective, they did what they wanted. They wanted to be able to bring up, especially toward the end, that stuff that features so prominently in the campaign's ads about Trump's own words about women. Her ability to get that in toward the end, I think, was pretty skillful and pretty important because it hammers home a really key point. It's going after those suburban women who they want to make uncomfortable by Trump's own words.
The question is whether they were still watching about 94 minutes into it. Because this one ran over the 10:30 allotted end time. That was partly because, frankly, there was so much interrupting going on, and I think
Lester Holt couldn't get a word in edgewise.
And was trying his best to get them to the end and get them to a point where they could conclude. As we mentioned, we're looking to take your questions. Certainly feel free to share your comments if you're joining us through Facebook. We're also streaming live, of course, at WashingtonPost.com, where you can find much more information about tonight, analysis. I know our friends, the fact checkers, had a busy evening.
They've been working hard.
They were real-time fact checking it as this continued, and that's a good place to sort of brush up if you were confused by some of the things you heard. We're hoping to be joined momentarily by the Congressman Gregory Meeks of the 5th District of New York, who represents part of Queens and Nassau County here on Long Island. Later, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who's a top communications specialist and aide for the Trump campaign, perhaps best remembered by many people as the daughter of Mike Huckabee, the Republican presidential candidate. She'll be here as well. We have a question from the audience, if you will. Do you think either of the candidates, Abby, changed any minds with their performances? Did they have any breakthrough moments? We touched on this a little bit.
That's a great question. I mean, in some ways, this debate once again reinforced a lot of things that people thought about these candidates. I don't think we really broke any new ground today. And maybe in some ways, it proved to some people who were looking to see whether Clinton could really sort of stand up to Trump on a debate stage and vice versa. It sort of showed them what that matchup would really look like. But, you know, on the issues, I don't think we got much new information. In fact, we may have muddied the waters even further on some of these things. And I think that Trump in particular didn't actually show that other side of him. He didn't show his ability to stay temperamentally even throughout a 90-minute debate. And so he was more of himself, and the people who like that are going to like that. The people who don't are going to find that they didn't like his performance.
I would think that watching it, that perhaps she didn't do anything to really expand her tent at all, but may have just certainly reconfirmed the suspicions that people had about Trump, and perhaps may have validated those concerns by pointing them out, or at least standing there and taking it from him and then sort of saying, look, folks, he's in his own reality.
Yeah.
We are awaiting our first guest shortly, and that is actually Sarah Huckabee Sanders for the Trump campaign. She beat Gregory Meeks to the couch, so we'll take her first. As we mentioned, she's a surrogate with the Trump campaign, a communications aide. She was the campaign manager for her father's 2016 presidential campaign. Mike Huckabee, of course, the former Arkansas governor, and had previously worked for his campaigns back in 2008 as well. Sarah has been making the rounds across Hofstra University all day on the Trump campaign's behalf, and she joins us now. Sarah, good to see you.
So much for joining
you want to
us.
pick up the mic there next to you, and that'll be your way to talk to us.
Okay, great.
Ed O'Keefe, Abby Phillip, good to see you.
Great to see you guys.
So tell us, how do you think Donald did tonight?
I thought he did great. There was a lot of excitement in our room, very enthusiastic, and we couldn't be happier with the contrast that I think the American people got to see very starkly tonight. That was the first opportunity to see the difference of a change agent in the race versus the status quo, and I think that was really clear tonight.
What exactly was Donald Trump trying to convey? Tell us a little bit more about what you think he went into it trying to convey, and how did he do that?
I think probably one of the biggest things that he was coming across is to show that he was presidential, show that he was ready to step in and lead on day one, and I think he showed that. I think the other places, the two big issues that we know Americans care most about in this election are the economy and national security, and I think he was extremely strong, and those were probably his best moments of the night when talking both about the economy and talking about national security. He, has actually created jobs. Hillary made a comment about she'd written a book about it. Donald Trump's actually done it. That contrast could not have been more clear, and I thought that was a really great moment for him.
He did seem to get a bit hot and bothered by some of her, at least attempts to make him hot and bothered, in discussing the fact that his father helped bankroll the early days of his business career. The fact that he has not released his tax returns, despite the fact that 69% of Americans want him to, according to a Bloomberg poll out today. You think he handled that all right?
I do. I thought he handled it just like I would have, and I thought he was poised. I thought he was confident.
Poised. You do.
I do. He never flinched when any of the attacks she made. He answered those attacks, but also he drew the contrast, and I think that was a big point and a big part of tonight's debate.
The fact that he repeatedly mentioned Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New England, the economic distress there, that's on purpose. I mean, those are places you want to win.
Not only are those places that we want to win, but those are places that are hurting. Those are places he has spent a lot of time in those communities talking to people day after day and really getting to see firsthand how hard some of those communities are being hit. And so I think he has a very good amount of credibility talking about what's going on in those places, having created jobs his entire life and going into those communities and seeing how much a lot of them are struggling.
Sarah, I want to ask you about this because there was a moment in the debate when Secretary Clinton said, Donald rooted for the housing crisis, and his response was, "That's business, buddy." And then later on, she said they were talking about whether he had paid some of his contractors going back to in some of his deals, and he responded, well, maybe they didn't do good enough work. I mean, are those the kinds of responses that reassure people about his handling of his own business dealings and how he would handle the economy?
Well, I think the biggest thing in that instance, and the main point that he's trying to drive home, is he's been a business leader. That was his job. His job was to grow his company, to protect the workers at his company, to help provide greater opportunity for him. And that's what he did in terms of buying up cheaper housing and things like that in the housing crisis. He wasn't a president. He wasn't running for office. His job at that moment was to create business, and that's what he did. And I think he was taking advantage of, frankly, failed policies by career politicians like Hillary Clinton.
So he's willing to defend his speculation in the housing market to the American public.
I think he did that tonight, and I think in part because his role at that time was a businessman, not somebody that was running to be president. His job was to protect the people at his company, and I think he did that.
And there's no reason to believe he would regret that now in hindsight as a politician.
That's a question you'd have to ask him.
How do you think Lester Holt did tonight? Moderators have been a big concern of this whole lead-up.
I thought he did a good job. I think he had the weight of the world on his shoulders.
Sure,
I certainly don't
Yeah.
envy him. I do think that he had a few more kind of pushing questions on Trump and not quite the same with Hillary. But at the same time, I think he had a really tough job, and I think overall he did a pretty good job.
We earlier called this the kitchen sink debate or the dirty laundry debate. It seemed that they covered everything. Tax returns, emails missing, temperament, judgment, comments made about women, comments made about trade deals. Going into the next two debates, should they shift away from this? Is your candidate prepared to discuss specifically what he would do about economic development, about healing the racial divide, something that was not answered directly by either candidate tonight,
Yeah, I think
about defeating ISIS, among other things?
Absolutely. I think we would love to get away from, frankly, we've been answering most of those questions day in, day out for the last several months, and would have liked to have not had to address all of them again tonight. I think particularly the majority of those, literally, I think we've answered hundreds, if not thousands of times. Those answers haven't changed. I would have liked us to talk about a little bit more substance tonight. And that's where I think Lester could have done a slightly better job guiding that part of the process, focusing more on policy and less on a little bit of the petty back and forth.
So what does the campaign do next? Where's he going this week?
I think we keep winning. That's what we've been doing the last couple of months. The polls have been certainly moving drastically into our favor. The momentum is behind us. The enthusiasm is behind Trump. And I don't think we change anything. I think we keep doing exactly what we're doing and get more votes than the other person. That's the goal at the end of the day, and I think we're on track to do that.
Is there anything in the polling that's come out in the last few days that makes you guys feel even more than ever that perhaps this is actually something you can win?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you have to look at the battlegrounds. I know everybody likes to talk about national polling just because it's, I guess, more fun, but the battlegrounds are what are really this race is going to come down to. And in states that have never even been on the map, frankly, places like Maine, Donald Trump is doing really well in a place where Republicans typically don't even compete. He actually has not only a chance to compete, but to win. Pennsylvania, Colorado, Ohio, Florida, those are places where he's pulling ahead or dead even, and that certainly wasn't the case even just a few weeks ago.
Your dad's never met a stage he didn't enjoy filling and was a master at this format himself. Did he provide any thoughts to you or to Mr. Trump about what to do tonight, and frankly, how to debate a Clinton, given that he has some history with that back in Arkansas?
You know, I know he's passed on a few thoughts and a few ideas, and certainly I think he probably has more experience debating the Clinton machine, certainly, than anybody else, and so I could see him being a player moving forward from here.
Excellent. Well, Sarah Huckabee Sanders,
Thank you.
top aide with the Trump campaign, we thank you so much for stopping by and talking to the good folks on Facebook.
You bet. Thank you guys so much. Have a good rest of your night.
You too. We'll see you soon. Again, I'm Ed O'Keefe, along with my colleague Abby Phillip. We're here at Hofstra University in the Media Filing Center after what was a contentious, momentous Clinton-Trump debate, and we're thrilled to be with you. We're taking your comments down below. If you have any good questions, we'll consider those as well. And we're thrilled to be joined now by Congressman Gregory Meeks of the 5th District of New York. which is part of Queens, part of Nassau County here on Long Island. And your birthday was yesterday as well.
Absolutely.
Did you do anything fun
Happy
to celebrate?
belated birthday.
What I celebrated was working in Nevada, getting the word out about Hillary Clinton and getting ready for today.
A loyal campaign
Well,
surrogate.
we want to talk about Nevada a little bit later, but how did you think she did tonight?
Oh, I think she was superb. I think that when you look at the 4 topics of which Lester Holt brought forth, there was only one person that was in complete command of each and every one of them. She came ready for the debate, and she came ready to be the next president of the United States. Clearly, Donald Trump had no command of any of the issues, and showed how unprepared he was for the debate and how he has not studied to be the next president of the United States.
Well, there was a lot of back and forth tonight, and it was sometimes very contentious, and Donald Trump interrupted her quite a bit. She didn't reciprocate. Do you think that was the right move for her to sort of let him say things, even if she could have interrupted him?
Well, I think that what the world got to see was he had nothing to say of substance. And so what you do then is filibuster, as he's done in the other debates that he was in. He had no command of any of the issues that were put forward. Where she had a clear plan for the middle class, for example. In the beginning of the debate, when we were talking about the economy, she talked about and had a clear and concise plan on how she would help the middle class and the working class move and do better. Donald Trump had no grasp of that at all. All he knew was trickle down and get tax breaks for his family and for the richest or top 1%. When we start to talk about race relations, clearly Donald Trump had no clue. To say that the answer to race relations in America is to go back to stop and frisk, a policy that has been deemed unconstitutional by the courts, just shows that he has complete lack of knowledge of what to do.
But on that question of racial healing, the question was, what will you do to foster or to bring about racial healing in this country? Neither of them directly answered that question. He may have said what you think he said there. She kept pivoting back to the idea that we got to do something about guns. That's not the way to heal racial healing in this country.
No, what she said was that, number one, we got to improve community and police relationships, that there has to be retraining of police to a large degree, and that the police want that also, that there has to be a healing and that in dialogue and conversation there. What she said was that we've got to figure out how we make sure that people can get a quality education without being deeply in debt, so that if families make less than $120,000, they can get an education. So what she said was that we've got to reinvest in our infrastructure and make sure that all Americans can participate in economically and financially close the economic gap, the wealth gap that's there. So she said a whole lot to talk about what needs to be done to help resolve some race relations we have in America.
You've been involved in national politics and New York politics for a while, so this question from a reader is a good one to ask you. How do you think the tone of this debate compares to 2008 and 2012?
Well, I think that the tone in this debate is different because one person had knowledge of facts and issues and the other person just threw out allegations and had no command. In 2008, they were debating issues back and forth. Each had a grasp of what they thought would be the best way to move this nation. In 2016, one has a grasp, one is focused, one is ready to be president of the United States. The other is just, says, believe me, I don't have a plan, but it's going to be good and America's going to be great again, as if we're not the greatest country on this planet right now.
Well, can I ask you about another issue that came up earlier on in this debate? She was asked about NAFTA and about TPP, and she denied that she had called it the gold standard, which is actually true. She did call it the gold standard. Why not just acknowledge that that was a mistake and move forward?
What she said was that she had hoped it to be the gold standard.
No, she actually said it was the gold standard. So why not just acknowledge it, move on?
Because the key is, as she looked in, as she said, she looked at all the trade agreements across the board. Some she voted for, some she voted against. She withheld her decision on TPP until such time the negotiations were done. At the time that she was talking, negotiations were still happening. So you did not know what the final product would be. Once she saw the final product, in her opinion, and she said this is where she differs with the president, in her opinion, it didn't meet the standard that she was looking for. That's what she said.
I mean, I think this is a key issue because we're talking about something that's sort of underlying Donald Trump's entire case to, you know, people in states like Ohio and Pennsylvania and the Rust Belt, and I think there's kind of a desire that people want to understand how she got there and to acknowledge that there were mistakes made. So, I mean, would you advise her to explain that better?
She
not
did.
just say that it wasn't done yet.
What she said was that we represent 5% of the world's population. So to say that we're not going to trade with other countries is not reasonable. That's what she said. She says, but we've got to make sure, and the standard that she utilizes when we do trade agreements is where and how they will create jobs in America. The fact of the matter is, if you look at Ohio, Ohio's unemployment rate is one of the lowest unemployment rates now in the nation. Ohio, when you look at manufacturing, etc., it is starting to come back. And the proposals that Hillary Clinton talked about, which will help the middle class and not just give tax cuts, because all Donald Trump talked about was how to bring these jobs back, was giving tax cuts to the wealthiest 1%. She talked about how she was going to tax the top 1% because they had a responsibility to the American people. And if you look at Donald Trump, who admitted during the debate, he has not paid any taxes. So if you look at
he didn't go that far. He didn't deny it, but he didn't say it
well,
was
what
true.
he said was, he says, I took advantage of whatever the laws were. That's what he said.
On TPP, would it pass in a lame duck if they brought it up?
Well, I'm not sure. We've got
Would
to
you
see
vote
what
for
takes
it?
place. I'm one who supports TPP.
Okay. If it doesn't work out in the lame duck, should the new president, whoever it is, renegotiate it, bring it up again? What
If
should
Hillary
happen?
Clinton is elected, or when she's elected and has not, then she needs to do the things that she thinks will improve the bill. But to say, you know, one of the things that I think Donald Trump talked about all during this debate was China, 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 China. China, number one, is not part of the TPP or any trade agreement. We don't have a trade agreement with China. Simply what we did with China was make sure that they were entered into the WTO,
right,
so that there could be rules and regulations on China in the global trade, and not just allow them to play outside of the rules. So there's no trade agreement with China, and in fact what we've got to do is to make sure that we offset China so China doesn't do the kinds of things that they have been doing.
You've seen the polls in the last few days. You know Democrats are quite good at bedwetting when the numbers get tight and they start to worry publicly about the idea that this thing may be slipping away. Why has it tightened?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. Number one, anytime you get into the campaign, you always know it's going to get smaller. But I think what really is happening here with the number, see, coming right out of the debates when we had that high number, 35% of the Republicans were unsure that they were going to support the Republican nominee.
You mean out of the conventions?
At the conventions, right.
Yeah.
35% of the Republicans said that they were not going to support the Republican nominee. So some of them are now saying they're going to support the Republican nominee, which changes the numbers. But if you look at overall, I think Donald Trump has peaked. When you get with those individuals, he has peaked where he's going or where he can go. Hillary's numbers are already on top of that and has the opportunity to grow even more. So, yes, you don't ever be overconfident in an election. You continue to work hard until the election day is over. You never take anything for granted. But if I was in Hillary's position or Donald Trump's position, which one would I rather be in? I surely would want to be Hillary Clinton and not Donald Trump.
This is why he's such a good campaign surrogate. Congressman Gregory Meeks of New York, thanks for letting us all visit Long Island and do this. Thanks for being here with us.
Good
Appreciate
being with
it.
you. My pleasure.
We are here again in the Media Filing Center. I'm told that as we were having our conversation with the Congressman, Donald Trump himself has surfaced somewhere here in the spin room and spin alley in the filing center. We anticipated that might happen. He's no stranger to these venues. He did this a lot over the course of the Republican primary. But I think this breaks with tradition in having a nominee come in here.
I think that's pretty unusual.
And try to spin his own debate performance. We haven't seen that before. Then again, a lot of TV cameras, and these are.
Yeah,
this is a format he
it very
enjoys.
much is the type of post-debate activity that he's used to in the primaries, and so in some ways it's not surprising that he's going to revive it again tonight.
Meeks seem pretty confident that they're going to rebound, but I mean, we've seen the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, Clinton World is I think Clinton World is cautiously optimistic. You know, when I talk to their allies and high command, they see the numbers tightening, but they believe in the fundamentals of the race, and they think that it's just too hard for Donald Trump to overcome the demographic advantages that they have, the map that President Obama left them with in 2012, and that's how they're looking at it. They're taking this part of the campaign in strides to some extent.
He made a good point, and I think it's true. Even if you look at the numbers that came out in the last few days, that Trump can't break out of the 40s. It seems maybe the low, high 40s.
But it's also been challenging for her to break into the.
That's true.
She hasn't often.
But she's sort of come down a little bit, while he seems to have hit a ceiling.
Exactly, and we've talked a lot about the third party element of this, but that's growing increasingly important as we get into the general. We have more and more people who seem to be interested in voting for a third party candidate, and that's something that isn't just a Donald Trump problem. It's actually increasingly now a Hillary Clinton problem.
Well, we're thrilled that you were able to join us tonight. Again, we're glad to have been here at Hofstra University. They did themselves proud. This actually was the backup site. This wasn't originally supposed to be a debate venue, but when a tinier school in Ohio backed out, Hofstra stepped up, and they seem to have done quite well in doing that. We want to invite you, if you haven't, to check out WashingtonPost.com. We'll have all the analysis and recaps of what happened throughout the night there, of course, for your reading overnight and into tomorrow. And of course, a lot of that will surface eventually here on Facebook as well. And we will do this again at the vice presidential debate next week, and the two preceding presidential debates through WashingtonPost.com and with our friends here at Facebook. So on behalf of all of us, I'm Ed O'Keefe.
And I'm Abby Phillip.
Thanks for joining us.
Good night.